Hello, you wonderful people of Syriana analysis. Thank you very much for tuning in and trusting me in bringing you information, especially regarding the political events that directly impact our lives. As the famous quote goes, even if you're not interested in politics, politics is interested in you. Therefore, channels like myself want to share information with you because nowadays it's a very unfortunate truth that if you turn on your TV, you're not going to see a comprehensive information. You're going to see one-sided information. Therefore, I find myself in a position to fill this vacuum and bring you probably the other side of the story. So first things first, I'm not going to give, let's say, lots of analysis in this video, but I'm going to show you lots of videos that I collected today, and I think you're all interested in this. And today, as you may know, President Vladimir Putin, he gave a speech. It's a long speech. We're not going to watch all the speech, but I found segments that are translated already to English because I'm quite sure that first, it's my job as a journalist to show you what the Russian side thinks and believes, because as a Westerner, if you're in the West, and even if you're not in the West, if you don't listen to the other side, and if you, especially if you consider Russia your enemy, if you don't listen how your enemy thinks, you cannot win over your enemy, and you cannot overcome the obstacles that your enemy is putting in front of you. This is just if you consider Russia your enemy. If you don't consider Russia your enemy, then you also want to listen what the Russian side says, because unfortunately, most of the Russian outlets are banned nowadays in Europe and in the United States. And on social media, I'm seeing increasing number of accounts, especially on Twitter, are being withheld in Germany. So if you're in Germany, and if there is an account that is based in Russia and or not even in Russia, but it is more or less pro-Russia, these accounts are being blocked. They're not suspended by Twitter, but they're withheld in Germany. So you cannot read and you cannot watch and you cannot see what these people are talking about, which I think is a recipe, first, to authoritarianism, and secondly, when you make your people ignorant about what the enemy says, your people will not be ready for a conflict if you're preparing them for a conflict with the enemy. But in my opinion, the real reason for these suspensions or suppression of information is because some of the things that the Russian side says make sense. So it could affect the public opinion in the West, which is the ruling elites want to keep it on an alarm mode against Russia. So the first video that I would like to share with you is when Putin says the West prepared Kiev for a big war. What does he mean with that when he says he prepared them for a big war? So as you may know, after 2014, after the coup d'etat, there were agreements between Russia and the West, which was held in Belarus. And both of these agreements were ignored by the Ukrainian government. And later we have the statements of Angela Merkel, we have the statement of Hollande, we have the statement of Poroshenko. They all say that these agreements weren't meant to be implemented, but only to buy time for the Ukrainian side in order to buy time and in order to be ready. So the agreement was the Minsk one and the Minsk two, which was signed by also Germany, Russia, and France. And it could have brought peace to Ukraine. And Ukraine could have saved lots of bloodshed nowadays and also kept its territories. But what Putin says here is the West prepared Kiev regime and the whole enslaved Ukraine for a big war, which means they pushed Ukraine into war, and probably the Ukrainians didn't want this war. Let's take a look.
Закрывали глаза на политические убийства, на репрессии киевского режима против неугодных, на издевательства над верующими. Все больше поощряли украинских неонацистов на террористические действия на Донбассе. В западных академиях и училищах натаскивали офицерский состав националистических батальонов, поставляли оружие. И хочу особо подчеркнуть, что еще до начала специальной военной операции велись переговоры Киева с Западом о поставках на Украину и систем ПВО, и боевых самолетов, и другой тяжелой техники. Помним мы и о потугах киевского режима заполучить ядерное оружие. Ведь говорили об этом публично. США и НАТО ускоренно разворачивали у границ нашей страны свои армейские базы, секретные биолаборатории. В ходе маневров осваивали театр будущих военных действий, готовили подвластный им киевский режим порабощенную ими Украину к большой войне. Получается, что все то время, когда пылал Донбасс, когда лилась кровь, когда Россия искренне, я хочу это подчеркнуть, именно искренне стремилась к мирному решению, они играли на жизни людей, играли, по сути, как говорят в известных кругах, крапленными картами. Этот отвратительный метод обмана уже не раз был опробован и раньше. Также бессовестно, двулично они вели себя, разрушая Югославию, Ирак, Ливию, Сирию. От этого позора никогда им не отмыться. Понятие чести, доверия, порядочности не для них. За долгие века колониализма, диктата, гегемонии они привыкли, что им все позволено. Привыкли плевать на весь мир. Оказалось, что также пренебрежительно, по-господски они относятся и к народам своих собственных стран. Их-то они ведь тоже цинично обманули баснями или обманывали баснями о поиске мира, о приверженности резолюциям Совета Безопасности ООН по Донбассу. Запад форсировал реализацию этого проекта сегодня, поддержав переворот 2014 года. Ведь переворот кровавый, антигосударственный, антиконституционный, как будто ничего не произошло, как будто так и надо. Сообщили даже, сколько денег на это истратили. В идеологическую основу заложил русофобию, крайне агрессивный национализм. Недавно одной из бригад вооруженных сил Украины, стыдно сказать, стыдно нам и мне, присвоили наименование «Эдельвейс», как гитлеровской дивизии, которая участвовала в депортации евреев, в казнях военнопленных, в карательных операциях против партизан Югославии, Италии, Чехословакии и Греции. У ВСУ и Нацгвардии Украины особой популярностью пользуются шеврона «Das Reich», «Мертвая голова», «Галичина», других эсэсовских частей, у которых тоже руки по локоть в крови. На украинскую бронетехнику наносятся опознавательные знаки вермахта нацистской Германии. Неонацисты не скрывают, чьими наследниками они себя считают. Удивительно, что на Западе этого никто из власть придержащих не замечает. Почему? А потому что им, извините за моветон, наплевать. Наплевать на кого делать ставку в борьбе с нами. В борьбе с Россией.
So what Putin says here about the ideological ground is makes it convenient for the Russians to be convinced about the war, because for him he is using historical context and historical background, and this is something very sensitive for the Russians. There is a huge, big history behind it. They have lived the World War II. And through the World War II, they have paid millions of people. They lost millions of people in the fight against the Nazis. So when you bring this issue, the Nazis, the neo-Nazis, the ideologues in Ukraine, you are actually sending these messages to the local public. This is not about the international public. And the NATO side is making Putin's job easy, because by supporting these neo-Nazi elements in Ukraine, you are making the job of Putin easier to sell the war in front of his public, and secondly, to convince the people who aren't convinced about the war. At the beginning, there were so many people who weren't convinced about the war, right, in Russia itself. But now, after weeks and months, you can see that all these ideologues in Ukraine who are speaking about that Russia is a terrorist state and Russians are terrorists and Russians should this should happen to Russians, and we should ban the Russians from sports, literature, schools, universities. So there is an organized racism against, or Russophobia against the Russians. And even though there could be lots of people from Russia who aren't with the war and they oppose Putin, but they're also being discriminated against, right? So, in my opinion, the the duty of Putin to sell this war in front of his people is being eased due to the NATO policies in Ukraine, and this is something that is very important in my opinion, because every leader wants to sell the war in front of his people, and he's not finding a hard time to sell this war. And there is a high percentage of support for Putin now in this war in Ukraine, partly because people believe in Putin and partly because of the wrong policies of NATO. This is just in my humble opinion. And speaking of racism, I will share with you this, Arthur. So this is the Finnish Prime Minister, Prime Minister Kaja Kallas. She says NATO countries must take control of Moscow and rewrite the mentality of Russian citizens so that the Russians will never be a threat again. This is one of the many examples that I'm trying to show you, this clear racism against the Russians. I mean, if this is not racism, I don't know what racism is, because he's speaking about the how Russians are born in a wrong mentality, how Russians are vile and aggressive and murderers and all these things. Uh, from the Russian side, they could say, were it not for our mentality, your countries weren't been liberated from the Nazis, right? But speaking and generalizing about the Russians in this way is quite ugly. Imagine, just replace the Russians with any other nationality, and like Americans or Germans or French people, and if a Russian politician or Putin says we have to occupy, let's say, just for an argument's sake, I don't know, France, and we have to change the minds and brains of the French people so that they won't be a threat to us again. I mean, the entire international community, between brackets, of course, would have been gone crazy, right? But such statements are being told and said without consequences nowadays. And even the people who were protesting against the war, they're Russians, by the way, and they know them, and I know them. They are not really speaking loud anymore because they themselves are facing this racism in Western societies. And there are some of them also here in Berlin that I know. Another video, which is, I think, is also very important. Putin says the West started a war against Russia. Look, Putin for a long time, he used to call the West and the Western leaders partners, and you know that. Now, when he says the West started a war against Russia, you can interpret it in two ways. One, you can say, like, Russia is now in a war against the West because the West declared a war against Russia, although Putin didn't say that literally. Or you can say that Putin says that the West started a war against Russia and we haven't decided yet what to do about it. But if you want to think about it rationally, and if I was in Putin's place, I think the message is clear. The West started a war against Russia, and we are in a war against them now. This is my interpretation.
The goal of the West is unbridled power. They have already spent more than $150 billion to supply weapons to the Kiev regime. Just compare. According to the Economic Cooperation and Development Organization, to help the poorest countries in the world, G7 allocated in 2020 and 2021 some $60 billion. Do you see this? They spent 150 for the war and the poorest countries. Allegedly, they are taking care about. They have allocated only 60. And they demand to follow them blindly, those countries who they pay to, and how they can talk about sustainability, about the environmental development. Where has it gone? And they are not stopping this flow of money to support war, and they are spending more money on coup in the other countries all across the world.
I mean, in my opinion, what he says here is not false, that the West do support coups around the world. And this is not something that is like a controversial or we have to debate about it. And this is something that And I really invite you to watch the Snowden documentary made by Oliver Stone, and you see how the United States spies not only on its people, on all its people, spies on the entire world. And they tapped entire Japan, for example, and they listen to every communication, they can see every text, every SMS, every WhatsApp, every Viber, every email, every they can open your cam like on your mobile, and they can see you, and they can blackmail you later if you were doing something, for example, and even if you're alone at home, they can see you. And if some of the countries, for example, who are allied with the United States, such as Japan, that they decide one day to not follow the American dictates, they can shut down the entire country. They have taken over their electricity, they have taken over their communication, they have taken over everything. So yes, imagine if the United States can do these things to its enemies, what can they do to enemy countries? For example, I think in 2012 or 2013, the CIA shut down the entire communication system in Syria, the internet, the communication, the phones, so that they give the opposition, between brackets, the advantage, the communication advantage, to advance in certain areas. And the entire country was blacked out. And I think the Chinese were the ones who helped Syria to restore their communication system in 2012 or 2013. I have to double check that information. But what I'm trying to say, why did the CIA do that in Syria? To create or to make its coup d'etat attempt successful. And they have done this in Ukraine in 2014, and see what's happening now in Ukraine. Like tens of thousands died because of a coup that the CIA engineered there. It's crazy. It's crazy. The next video, Putin says Russia cannot be defeated on the battlefield. Therefore, there is an information warfare against Russia and indoctrination against the Russian citizens to hate their own country, and at the same time to, let's see, I think this is it. Just let me check. Putin, yes. Against the Russian people and against the European and Western people.
It cannot ignore the fact that Russia cannot be defeated on the battlefield. So they're waging increasingly aggressive information attacks. First of all, targeting the young generations, lying on every step, distorting historical truth, attacking our culture, the Russian Orthodox Church, and other traditional religious institutions in our country. Now look at what they're doing with their own peoples. They're destroying the institution of family, their cultural and historical identity, and various perversions with regard to children up to pedophilia are accepted as the new norm, and priests are forced to recognize and officiate same-sex weddings. People can live however they want, and we in Russia have never intruded into people's private life, and we're not going to do that. But what we want to say is maybe they should take a look in the scripture, into the holy book of any great religion. It says that the family is a union between woman and man. And these holy texts are now being increasingly doubted in the West. The Anglican Church is now considering the idea of a gender-neutral God. What can we say? God forgive them. They don't know what they're doing.
I mean, whether you like him or hate him, agree with him, don't agree with him in politics, but what he said here is correct. And the attempts to destroy the church, the family union, the family institution in the West it's true. They're trying to do it all the time. And this gender craziness, madness, pronouns as gender fluid, gender neutral God, and all this stuff, and then God is gay, Jesus was trans, and all this stuff. Those are crazy things. But why did he mention this? One, for his own people, that the alternative for our Orthodox conservative rule is this. This is what they're trying to export to us. But the second, which is more importantly, is directed to the conservatives in the West, in Europe and in the United States. And you know well how much the conservatives in the West are sensitive about these issues, and they have their own war and conflict with the liberals in their own countries about these ideologies. So that's also one of the reasons why lots of conservatives in the West, and I'm talking about the politicians, but on a popular base, they do not think that Russia is their enemy. And they don't want to fight against Russia, and they don't consider this is their war. If you go to the United States and check the conservative activists, vast majority of them are against the war with Russia, and they don't want to support Ukraine because they know this is also part of this conflict is because this conflict of ideas between the both sides, and for them, the Russian side represents or protects their own convictions more than their own leaders, especially when it comes to the democratic administration and the liberal establishment in the United States, the media, the NGOs, indoctrinating children. Like, there are now gay and lesbian kindergartens. I mean, is it really like 3 to 5 to 6 years old kids, do they really know what's their sexuality, and why are we even sexualizing our kids? Those are question marks, right? And why this focus, like instead of teaching children math, physics, and sciences, history, geography, you can go now to the United States and just pick 10 children in a primary school age and ask them where is Ukraine on the map, and they can't map it. But if you ask them about genders and all these identities that they preach, everybody knows. So which one is more beneficial to create a strong society and functioning society? Is to teach them about sciences, history, geography, mathematics, chemistry, physics, how to make money, banking, or teaching them gender studies, feminist studies? I don't know. It's all about ideologies, what they're teaching there. And you can, the other day I was watching a video in China. Small kids in a primary school are learning how to install and uninstall a gun. While in the United States, they're teaching them there are 60 genders or something. So you can see this shift of power to the East, because in the West, they're losing their mind about these issues, and they're distracting their kids from important issues. The last video for Putin is he says Russia will work with partners to create a system independent of the dollar. And as you may know, the dollar was for a very long time is the dominant currency and the dominant reserve currency, and dollar is linked to the petrol, to the fuel, to the gold. So all the international system revolves around the dollar. And now these countries, China, Russia, Iran, India, Pakistan, they're trying to find even Saudi Arabia with China, they're trying to find alternative international monetary systems and reserve currencies in order to challenge the American hegemony. So let's take a look.
And together with the currencies of friendly states, it is more than half of all the settlements. And we will continue to work with our partners on creating sustainable and safe system of international settlements that would be independent from dollar and other Western reserve currencies. Because with these policies by the Western elites and Western leaders, it will lose its universal role. With their own hands, they are doing this. Not us. We're decreasing the settlements in dollars and other so-called universal currencies. They are doing this with their own hands. You know, there is this saying, cannons instead of butter. Of course, the defense of the country is the priority, but when we are trying to resolve these issues, we should not repeat our own previous mistakes. We should not destroy our own economy. We have everything we need to preserve our security and to continue to develop our country, and we will continue to follow this logic.
So what he says here, Russia has everything it needs to secure its, to guarantee its security, and I believe in that. But Russia doesn't have everything it needs to become a strong economic country. And that is why Russia worked in the past decade to have a better relations with China and in India. China and India are like how 3 billion, 4 billion people. And when you merge the economic interests of these both or 2-3 countries together, and you have mutual interest, then the political relationship will also be improved. And accordingly, I believe if China weighs in a stronger manner, just like the West is now warning China, they're saying don't give weapons to Russia. But if China jumps the wagon and provides Russia with sophisticated weaponry or any sort of weaponry that Russia needs in this warfare, I think there is no way back from this. And it's not going to end until there is a new international system. Up until this moment, we are still on the verge. The Russians are advancing few meters here, few meters there, but if the Chinese weigh in and give the Russians all what they need to create a new world order, there is no way to escape from that. This is just in my humble opinion. But up until this moment, the Chinese, they have their own calculations. And the Chinese do not want, in my opinion, to be in the same wagon or to be following another power. They can be a power by themselves, an independent power by themselves. Probably this is the mentality of the Chinese, but we don't know yet. We will see in the coming days and weeks. One of the funny things that I saw this week watched this week on Twitter is John Kirby. He's the coordinator for strategic communication at the National Security Council in the White House. And he was giving a press conference. And during this press conference, he mentions that Russia is actually provoking NATO. And when he was asked how is that happening, he said they're putting their bases close to our bases, or they're doing drills near our bases. And the question was like, who expanded on to the others' borders? Is Russia expanding to the east, or it's NATO expanding to the west on the borders with Ukraine? It's like, if this is your country, and NATO came and put its bases here and says, "Oh, you're provoking me because you have a bases here." I mean, this is the most ridiculous statement you can ever make. It's just like surrounding Iran with all military bases of the United States or China or even Russia, and then say, "Oh my God, look how close their countries to our military bases." This is a very interesting debate. Let's say it's a heated debate in the White House between John Kirby and Matt Lee. Finally, some journalist is asking serious questions, right?
To look at this and say the reason that the Russian army is on NATO, the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is because NATO has expanded rather than the Russians expanding? That, in other words, NATO has moved closer to Russia rather than Russia moving closer to NATO? Is that not an accurate way to look at this?
I think that's the way President Putin probably looks at it. It's certainly not the way that we look at it.
You don't think that NATO has expanded eastward toward Russia?
NATO has expanded,
Okay.
and the expansion has been a good thing for...
So the reason that the Russian army is at NATO's doorstep is not the fault of the Russian army, it's not the Russian army that's done it. It's NATO has moved closer to, moved
I'm pretty
east.
sure it wasn't NATO who was ordering, upwards of 15 battalion tactical groups to within 10 kilometers of the border with Ukraine. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't NATO who put little green men inside Ukraine to destabilize eastern cities.
I'm pretty sure that Ukraine is not a member of NATO. So unless that's changed,
It's not
Okay.
changed. But I'm
So,
pretty sure the movement by Russia is Russia's decision.
if NATO has moved east, the reason that the Russian army is closer or on NATO's doorstep is because NATO moved, not
NATO
because
is not an anti-Russia alliance. NATO is a security alliance.
Unfortunately, for 50 years it was an anti-Soviet alliance. So
Where's
do you
the
not
Soviet
understand
Union
it? So do you not understand how, or can you not even see how the Russians will perceive it as a threat, and the fact that it keeps getting closer to their border while their troops I mean, the places where their troops are, you say their troops are, and may have been in Ukraine and Georgia, are not NATO members.
I'm not going to pretend to know what goes in President Putin's mind or Russian military commanders. I mean, okay. I barely got a history degree at the University of South Florida. Right. What I can tell you is that NATO is a defensive alliance. It remains a defensive alliance.
Fair enough, but it has moved east. Correct? I mean, that's just a fact.
It has expanded, absolutely.
Right, exactly.
But there's no reason for anybody to think the expansion is a hostile or threatening move. And we've been saying that throughout the last 15 years, Matt.
It's like you're moving closer to Russia. You're blaming the Russians for being close to NATO.
No.
That's exactly what Hegel said.
We're blaming the Russians for violating the territorial integrity of Ukraine and destabilizing the security situation inside Europe.
Which is not a NATO member.
I see
other countries feel threatened.
This is the most ridiculous debate I have ever seen in the White House. The most ridiculous one. I've seen so many, but this was the most ridiculous one. First of all, Kirby is treating us, the audience, the journalist, who's respected journalist, as a sheeple, as someone like you can just fool with a bonbon, just take this and believe me. It's like NATO is a security alliance. It's not an anti-Russian alliance. It's like, what are you talking about? Like for 50 years, it was an anti-Soviet alliance, and after the end of Cold War, they have expanded to the doorstep of Russia. Although there was a clear, there wasn't a written agreement, unfortunately, but there was a promise by George Bush, the father, not to expand one inch to the east of Berlin. And then what happened? The NATO expanded to Poland and all the way to Russia. So why I'm showing you these videos from Russia or what Putin says, I want you to see what the Russians think. I'm not endorsing or promoting the Russian narrative. People really confuse nowadays between real journalism and propaganda. I'm showing you this video so that we understand what the Russians think, because we have to take into consideration the Russian concerns. Because Russia is not a small country. Russia is a big country. It has the most nuclear weapons in the world. So if you don't understand what the Russians do, or the Russians think, or the Russians consider a threat, then how can you avoid conflict with Russia? Unless you want a conflict with Russia, right? So this is the issue. If you ban every single Russian outlet and you stop these Twitter accounts, and you don't want anyone to show what the Russians think, that means you're preparing your people for a war. But do all people want war? No, not all people want war, and especially in the United States. And thankfully, there are increasing number of voices in the United States opposing the war. And I think it was on Sunday. Yes, yesterday on Sunday, there was a demo in Washington, D.C. against the war called Rage Against the War. And I will show you some of the segments of what they spoke in this during this demo. Let's first see some of the segments of the demo itself.
This march is massive. It's 2 blocks ahead. 2 or 3 blocks is the front of the march. It's going back blocks, all the way to those sirens. I'm gonna have to stand here for a few minutes to get everyone.
So as you can see, there was this demo, and then there were speeches given by important participants, which were really appreciated that they appeared, such as Tulsi Gabbard, Max Blumenthal, we had Jill Stein, we had Jimmy Dore, and there were many people there. Rand Paul, I think he was there. So the first speech or segment of a speech that I want to play is by Scott Horton. And he mentions the promise of George Bush not to expand 1 inch to the east. And but unlike the promise, we've seen all this expansion of NATO. So this was a good memory refreshment for those who were present in this demo. Let's take a look together.
Bush Sr. made a promise at the end of the Cold War not to extend the NATO military alliance east into the former Warsaw Pact states. But he was lying. It was a promise that was made to be broken. When Bill Clinton came in, he inflicted a policy called shock therapy on the Russian economy, which absolutely destroyed it and led to the deaths of millions, literally millions of excess deaths in the 1990s. He also rigged the election of 1996 to prevent the people of Russia from throwing out Boris Yeltsin, who had helped the Americans to inflict this policy on them. He also backed bin Laden's Mujahideen in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Chechnya. And he expanded NATO in 1999, bringing in Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic. The great Ron Paul, congressman from Texas, at the time warned that this would not strengthen NATO, but weaken it by provoking right-wing nationalist ethnic backlash against the new order in Europe. W. Bush sponsored color-coded revolutions in Georgia, Ukraine, and Kyrgyzstan.
Thank you.
He brought 9 more nations into NATO, and in 2008 at Bucharest promised to bring Ukraine and Georgia into America's military alliance as well. He also tore up the anti-ballistic missile treaty and installed Mark 41 missile launchers in Romania and Poland, which are dual-use launchers that can hold Tomahawk cruise missiles, which can be tipped with hydrogen bombs, violating the spirit of the INF Treaty. Barack Obama did a lot of things, but the worst thing that he did was he overthrew the government of Ukraine for the second time in 10 years in 2014 in the phony Maidan Revolution, which was really a coup accomplished by no-fooling, Hitler-loving Nazis on the ground.
No lies detected, as we say. And it's really true. I think one of the worst things, let's say, of Barack Obama was engineering this coup d'etat in Ukraine. But I think the first worst thing that Obama did is sponsoring the jihadists in Libya and in Syria, and which has caused 50,000 deaths in Syria. This was Obama's war. The one that received the Nobel Peace Prize, while thousands and thousands and thousands of people died by his drone program. And 500,000 people died in Syria because of his regime change war in Syria. And now, the Obama-Biden administration in 2014, which engineered this coup d'etat in Ukraine, now we see the fruits of this coup. Tens of thousands of people are dying in Ukraine now, right now, because of them. And he received what? A Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, is this really, are we still living in a civilized world, or this is a jungle? And today we have the issue of the Nord Stream pipelines, and we have information that the United States committed this industrial terrorism against infrastructure that belongs to its ally Germany. And there are consistent attempts to suppress this information. But as much as they try, they can hide it for a few weeks, few days, but in a globalized world like this, they cannot hide it forever. And this is Denis Kucinich. He speaks about the Nord Stream. I think it's important to watch this segment together.
In blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, this government has deliberately circumvented Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution, the authority of Congress to make war. It has violated international criminal law by conspiring to commit acts of sabotage and violence on the high seas. It has used illegal and unconstitutional means to destroy the energy resources needed to protect millions of people in Europe during the winter, and then to profit from its illegal actions by selling energy to Europe at a 4 to 6 times markup. It has done so. It has done so blatantly, cynically, simultaneously taking credit for the destruction of the Nord Stream pipeline and then denying any role in it. I speak directly to those responsible, thanks to a courageous journalist, Seymour Hersh. Thanks to a courageous journalist, Seymour Hersh. We know what each of you did at the Nord Stream pipeline, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary of State, Mr. National Security Advisor, and Madam Undersecretary of State, and we will not rest until you are held accountable by Congress, by the International Criminal Court, and by the American people at the next election for your reprehensible conduct, which has debased our Constitution, undermined the rule of law, in our name, committed an act of war which threatened the peace of the world and the stability of our own nation. No amount of balloon militarism will distract us from your profoundly lawless, reckless conduct.
Two comments I have on this video. First is the Russian flag that you saw behind him. There is so much talk on social media now by pro-Ukraine people that they say, oh my God, look, there was a Russian flag. This was about, the entire demo was about making peace with Russia. So of course there will be Russian flags. So what is wrong with having a Russian flag and doing the demo? You are calling for peace with Russia. So you're putting the Russian flag and the American flag just next to each other. And as far as I remember, the United States doesn't consider yet Russia an enemy state. And you don't see this outrage when armed deliveries from the United States go to and in the hands of the neo-Nazis, and they are actually carrying the flag, the SS flag. And there are the Nazi symbols on their tanks that they receive from the United States, and their vehicles, and their badges. Everywhere we don't see this outrage. One Russian flag near the American flag, and then, oh my God, this should be discredited. The second thing that he mentioned, that this establishment will pay the price in the next elections, and it's not going to happen. Unless there is a drastic change in the United States and in the entire system. You cannot participate in elections and win against the establishment. The establishment is in full control over every aspect in the United States. They know everything about you. They have the data, everything. What you believe, what you think, where you're going, what are you doing, what is your weaknesses, what is your social status, what is your mental status. They know everything, and they know how to manipulate the people. So election, I don't think there will be a change through elections. How can a change happen? This is up to the American people, but it's not going to happen through elections. The next speech is for the great Jimmy Dore, which I really like. And he speaks about how this demo unified the people, unified the left and the right. And this is the most important thing, in my opinion, in the West. All this talk about right and left is distraction. It's just distracting you from the core of the issue, which is the establishment. They make the left hate the right and the right left the left, and then they create enmities among the right, different people in the right, and then create enmities among different people in the left. It's a divide and conquer strategy, so you get distracted from the core of the issue. And I think Jimmy aimed at this to send this message. Let's take a look.
I'm reminded of the words of Frederick Douglass, who said, "I will join with anyone to do good, but with no one to do bad." If Black Panthers can march hand in hand with the KKK down Las Vegas Boulevard to get welfare payments reinstated, we can join hands with the right wing, the libertarians, the left, the socialists, the communists, everybody to stop a nuclear war. And what's happening right here at this rally is what actually scares the hell out of the establishment. Everybody from the left, everybody from the right, everybody from the middle coming together to realize that we have more in common than divides us, and we share a common enemy. That enemy is the military-industrial complex and the oligarchy, the same oligarchy that did a controlled demolition of our economy, and then they want me to hate my neighbor for the pain I'm feeling because of that, because they wouldn't take a vaccine that didn't work the way they said it did in the first fucking place. Well, I'm not going to hate my neighbor. I'm going to love my neighbor. Because my neighbor is suffering under the same oligarchy that I'm suffering under, and he didn't cause it. The oligarchy did, and they don't want us to join together. And I have one message for the right and the left. If everybody on the right could just realize that not everybody on the left likes Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. We just want to end the wars and have health care that doesn't bankrupt us. That would go a long way. And if everybody on the left could just realize that not everybody on the right is a white supremacist Trump or gun nut, they're just fucking gun nuts. I love you. Love each other. Come together. I'll see you at the next anti-war rally. Stay together.
This is the most important message in this demo. And the real reason that they hate Jimmy because he's open to conversation with the right. And that's why they called him a right-winger, right? Jimmy is a left-wing person. And they call him a right-wing or because he hosts right-wing people. He goes on a right-wing television. He delivers his left-wing message on a right-wing television such as Tucker Carlson on a conservative channel. And he hosts right-wing people on his show because he wants to give a platform for people who share this particular ground, like they share this ground, which is anti-war. The rest of the opinions that they disagree with, they can disagree in a civil way. But when it comes to war, if you have someone in the right who is against war and the left against the war, and if you combine these two, this is the real reason, this is the real threat to the establishment. And Jimmy says it quite eloquently and perfectly. Our next guest is... Our next guest, I feel like I'm presenting them to you, is Jill Stein. She's from the Green Party in the United States, and she was also a candidate for the presidency. And she delivers actually a similar message. And she says the United States has some 800 foreign bases. Our so-called war on terror continues in a mind-boggling 85 countries. We have conducted over 250 military interventions in the past 20 years and killed a staggering 6 million people. Take a look.
All right. Wow. You are beautiful. It is so wonderful to be here today to see us all across the political spectrum. And I just want to say, in my experience, it's not so much a matter of right or left. It's really a question of the few elites at the top versus all the rest of us. And that's what they are afraid of. So we're here today not just to rage against the war machine. We're here to dismantle the war machine because it is hurting us all. No one more than the people of Ukraine, who are the cannon fodder in this superpower proxy war. We need a movement to overcome the powerful special interests behind the war machine, the war profiteers, the fossil fuel barons, the health insurance barons who are profiting from the carnage. And in the interests of building that movement, I want to clarify today some of the forbidden truths that we are not supposed to talk about. These are the empowering truths the war machine does not want us to know. This is especially for the benefit of the people who are just waking up to realize that we are all in the crosshairs of this crisis. Martin Luther King spoke the first forbidden truth nearly 60 years ago, that the U.S. war machine is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. And it is much bigger now, and it's impoverishing and endangering us all. It squanders 2/3 of our discretionary budget. It puts at grave risk virtually every dimension of our security, nuclear, economic, food, climate, energy, everything. Left to its own devices, the war machine with its proxy NATO will destroy life on the planet. It is in the process of doing that right now. The dimensions of the war machine, you may know, are quite totally off the charts. The U.S. has some 800 foreign bases, while Russia has about 30. Our so-called war on terror continues in a mind-boggling 85 countries. Do we hear about that? Not one bit. Our wars are going on in 85 countries. Our 840 billion, and that, by the way, is from the Cost of War project at the Boston University, not exactly a hotbed of radicalism. These are the basic truths that we are not supposed to know. Our $840 billion military budget is equivalent to the next 9 military budgets combined, and the $100 billion we are spending to support war in Ukraine, that alone is greater than the entire annual Russian military budget. We've conducted over 250 military interventions in the past 20 years alone and killed a staggering 6 million people in just a portion of the so-called U.S. war on terror. This murderous military spending consumes resources desperately needed here at home by 70,000 people who die each year for lack of health insurance, for 500,000 homeless people on any given night out on the street, for 33 million mired in student debt, 100 million in medical debt, 22 million impoverished children, and on and on.
I think this is enough. The message was quite clear here about the American military-industrial complex and its being an enemy to the people in the United States and also to the entire world. When there is an entire complex in the United States that profits from wars, then you will make up wars. Like, even if there is no reason or geopolitical convenience to wage a war or do coup d'etat or any sort of intervention, but since you are profiting from it, you will create reasons for that, right? The last video for today is my favorite, Tulsi Gabbard, that I like her a lot. And she speaks about the nuclear holocaust, and she says there is like no way we can win this war. There is no party that can win this war if there is a nuclear war, and there will be a nuclear holocaust if we continue pushing Russia to the verge. Take a look.
This proxy war that we're fighting against Russia right now could turn at any moment into a direct conflict between the United States, NATO, and Russia, the country that has more nuclear weapons than any other in the world. Now, anyone with a little bit of common sense knows that a Cold War can very quickly turn to a hot war. And that when you're waging a hot war against a nuclear-armed country, it's just a matter of time before it leads to the use of nuclear weapons at any moment. And here's the insanity of it all. We have talking heads on TV, we have politicians, we have very powerful people here in the United States and all around the world speaking with a straight face, well, you know, if we start World War III or when World War III starts, here's how we're going to fight and win. That if Putin decides to use tactical nuclear weapons, here's what we're going to do, as though such a war could ever be won. It cannot be won. World War III cannot be won. They're living in this archaic mindset of World War I and World War II and not facing the realities that we have today. There is no way to win a nuclear war. There is only one end, and that is a nuclear holocaust. So we're gathered here today because we know that it doesn't have to be this way. We know that there is a better way and that the task before us is urgent and necessary. We have people gathered here from all over the country, people who are gathered here from all ends of the political spectrum. And if we were to have a conversation My guess is there may be other things we don't agree on. But the truth is that we could disagree about everything else. Everything else. But the one thing that we do agree on that brings us together here today is that we value life. We want to live. We want our loved ones to live and thrive. We want to be able to go out on a day like today and walk in the trees and hear the birds chirping with the sun shining down on our face. We understand that whatever our differences may be, that we must stand together as people who cherish peace, security, and freedom. We must set aside our differences, work together to fire those warmongering politicians from both political parties who serve their masters in the military-industrial complex instead of serving the people. Those warmongers who carelessly and thoughtlessly are sending us hurtling towards a nuclear holocaust that would destroy all life and the world as we know it. The only way we can stop them is when we stand together and lift our voices in unity, telling them no. We will not let you destroy us. We will not let you destroy our loved ones, our communities, our country, here in the United States and around the world.
This is really the targeted message. I think the organizers were very clever and clear with the participants that they have to focus on this point to unite the people on the right, on the left, in the center on one particular issue. We want peace. We are pro-life. We don't want a nuclear annihilation. We don't want a nuclear Armageddon. We don't want a nuclear Holocaust. And this war cannot be won. And this is the truth. There is no way this war can be won. If you want to win on Russia, it means nuclear war. If Russia wants to win on NATO, it means nuclear war. The only way is negotiation. If this makes me a Putinist, then let it be. If I'm calling for diplomacy and negotiations between the both sides. But how did the mainstream media cover this demonstration in the United States? I mean, not so surprising, right? That they defamed the demonstration. Instead of being with the people, talking with them, understanding their point of view, and delivering the messages of these people, because this is what journalists do. They represent the voice of the people. And these people who were in the demonstration, they're part of the people. So when you defame them, you are siding with the establishment. You are actually doing the job of the establishment against respected activists, journalists, politicians, whether former or current. This is not the job of the mainstream media to defame people and call them names. So when you can't counter a narrative, an argument, defame. This is the strategy of the weak. When you don't have an argument and you just defame your enemy, then you are the weaker side, because you cannot convince your people, the people who follow you, that what you say is the truth. And when you can't convince them with the truth, your own truth, you start defaming the other side. This is what the MSNBC did. This Rachel Maddow, if I'm not mistaken her name, and she is a mouthpiece for the establishment. In a criminal way, she would defend, like, if the United States launches now a nuclear weapon on Russia and millions of people die, and if Russia retaliates and millions of people die in the United States, you will see people like this Rachel. She will come out and defend the decision of the United States to sending us to nuclear war. These people are your enemy. Watch.
And I mean truly random rally on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. A rally in support of Russia, I guess, given all the Russian flags. At least a rally against the U.S. supporting Ukraine in trying to stand up against the Russian invasion of their country. This was a tiny event. It was small. It was a weird assemblage of Americans. There were Proud Boys there. There were some of the white supremacist groups you'd recognize from the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville a few years ago. Also represented prominently the remains of the bizarre Lyndon LaRouche cult. There were a lot of people with Russian flags, also the occasional flag of the former Soviet Union. Also, at least one person who guest hosts for Tucker Carlson on the Fox News channel was there as a featured speaker. There were anti-vaccine conspiracy theorists, a lot of them. There were cryptocurrency promoters. It was a really weird group. It was a small rally and a weird one. But that's what it looks like. That's the assemblage of short straws and split ends and loose change and loose electrons that's advocating in this country that Russia's in the right in this war and America should be on Putin's side as he keeps invading other countries. I mean, no disrespect to the Americans who turned out as part of this small event this weekend, but it's not like they represent a big constituency that is arguing for this pro-Russia point of view.
I mean, first of all, she says, with due all respect, you don't respect your people. You are a pawn. You are a tool in the hands of the establishment. You're a soldier in the hands of this establishment, the criminal establishment. And when you can't really counter the arguments and the slogans of this demo, you start downgrading them. Oh, it was just a small demo. And they were part of cults. They were radicals, KKKs. They were Russian flags. Oh my God. Soviet flags. Oh my God. So, and conspiracy theories. The biggest conspiracy theory, it's her. You should remember that she was the biggest conspiracy theorist when she pushed for this Russian collusion with Putin. With the Russian collusion with Trump. That Russia brought Trump to power. And we have now clear evidence that this was not the case. She is the conspiracy theorist. I'm very sad to see these people, but also very happy that there are so many people like Jill Stein, like Jimmy Dore, like the Aloha, all these beautiful people, Max Blumenthal, Tulsi Gabbard, Rand Paul. Those people, if I sit with them, I just can feel like I can have a nice beer or a coffee with them and talk politics. People like Rachel Maddow and all the other people, it's like these people are detached from the reality. They're completely on a different side of the spectrum. And I'm not talking about the political spectrum. They are the establishment, right? They don't know their jobs. That's why we're here to bring you the other side of the story, because the purpose is educational. That's why I'm shedding light on these things, because you're not going to see these things on the TV. Finally, the last video. What is the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans? As I said, in the next elections, there's not going to be a difference. If you vote Democrats or Republicans, there's not going to be any change in foreign policy. There's not going to be change in terms of waging wars. Both parties are for wars. And this is what Jimmy Dore says the other day on Patrick Bet-David's podcast, which is a really nice segment I want to share with you. This is the last segment I want to share it with you. And do you agree with Jimmy Dore? And I replied to him, I say, no lies detected. The US is now occupying over 50% of our oil fields in Syria and choking 20 million people with draconian sanctions. And the problem is most Americans do not know about it. And they don't know that they don't know. Take a look.
The only difference between a Democrat and a Republican, as Ralph Nader said, is the speed at which their knee hits the floor when a donor walks in the room.
Oh, yeah.
And so it doesn't matter who's president. Barack Obama was not a departure from George Bush. He was a continuation of George Bush. He took us from 2 wars to 7 wars. He kicked 5.1 million families out of their homes while he made sure the bankers didn't miss their bonuses. He deported twice as many Hispanics as Donald Trump. He built those cages that put those people in. He dropped 26,000 bombs. The Air Force ran out of bombs. That's a fact. They ran out of bombs. He dropped so many bombs. He did a drone program that killed 90% innocent people. You know, if somebody walks into a mall and shoots 15 people down with this gun, that's the biggest thing. Oh, my God. Barack Obama was doing that on a daily basis, killing women and children with his drone war. And he got a Nobel Peace Prize. He got a Nobel Peace Prize. He didn't even do anything. That's how. And so it's a uniparty. And so when Trump got in office and he mentioned that there's a deep state, they're like, you can't say that. What are you doing? And when he said, hey, when they asked him, why are you leaving your troops in Syria? And he said, for the oil. They're like, you can't. He goes, no, it's for the oil. No, it's for liberty. It's for helping the people. Yeah. No, it's for the oil. It's our oil. And so he let the cat out of the bag, and they can't have that. That's he blew the whistle on what's actually going on. Our wars are for oil. Our wars are economic wars, just like what's happening in Ukraine. This is an economic war. We're trying to put a hurt and isolate Russia. We're afraid of Russia and their natural resources and their manpower coming together with Germany with their technology and their capital. And we've been saying that for decades. And so that's why we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. And that's why this Ukraine war is happening. And people have no idea what's happening. And what's worse is they have no idea that they have no idea what's happening.
Yeah, that's the crazy part.
They have no idea that they have no idea. That's exactly the thing. Unfortunately, lots of people in the States do not know. And thankfully, with voices like Jimmy Dore, he has over 1 million subscribers now, and he's reaching to lots of people. That's why he's being smeared by the media a lot. But I think the narrative war in the United States is in favor of these alternative people because they're more convincing and they have evidence and they have their style in convincing people, and they're not smearing the other side for believing this shit. They're talking to the people, and people apparently are sick and tired of spending trillions of dollars on weapons and ammunition on a budget, defense budget, and they don't have free education, healthcare in the United States. It's crazy. This video was a little bit long, I believe, but it was very necessary, and I think it was very important to cover what the Russian side believe and what they consider a threat and what Putin said today, and also what the anti-war movement in the United States is doing. Don't believe in this shit that these people are pro-Russian. They're not pro-Russian. They are pro-United States, because being pro-peace with Russia is pro-American. Being pro-war with Russia means you are pro the establishment. You're not benefiting from this war. They are benefiting from this war. Just remember that. If you're an American and watching this, just remember this. So I've been your host, Kerik Almasian of Syriana Analysis. If you're new, please subscribe, hit the like button, and also activate maybe the notification bell, because lots of people say when they open YouTube, they don't see my content on their feed. And if you want to support my work, please become a patron. It's very important for me to have financial independence so that I can bring you such a content without any fear from anyone and not fear of losing any other job. So we see you most probably tomorrow in a nice interview. Probably will be with an Emirati journalist. So stay tuned for tomorrow and see you next time.